All right. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Tyrants Den. Today, we have a very special guest today, Jordan Dittloff. He ran for Libertarian and for the, excuse me for the Libertarians in the Victorian Senate last election, and we got him here today. Is there anything else you'd like to say about yourself?
No, look, it's a pleasure to be here. Always good to see another libertarian podcast firing up.
Mhm.
I'm tied with John Ruddick for most participations in Collective Vitals podcast, so we need to start broadening our reach.
Right. Uh, all righty. So yeah, as said, you were running for the Senate. Like, what did you, what?
Take your time.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm like this. I'm not this bad. Anyway, but what were your takeaways from last election?
So I think the last 2 weeks, as you can probably, I suppose, imagine or sympathise with, it's been a bit of a decompression experience for me. I've put 13 months of pretty hard work into the Senate campaign. So I was endorsed around mid-April in 2024, and that took me through to 2 weeks ago when we had the federal election and we got the final results. Obviously, the results weren't what I was hoping for. I ran believing that we had a potential opportunity to win the sixth Senate spot here in Victoria based on our results at the federal election in 2022 and based on what I thought the results were going to look like this time around, which was that the Liberals would basically have enough of a showing that they would get 2 and a bit quotas and that we would be able to build on our result from 2022. Now, neither of those things happened. And instead, we look likely to see, although the Senate results are still being counted, a third ALP senator elected in Victoria. So 3 ALP, 2 Liberal, 1 Green. On election night, I thought it might have been the case that One Nation got that 6th Senate seat, but that doesn't look to be the case now. And even though we didn't get the result that I was hoping we would, and obviously I wasn't elected, we got around about 0.6% of the vote over the state in Victoria for the Senate. But had we run in every seat in the state, I think we would have got the average of about 1 to 1.2%, which was the average result we got in the seats we did run in. So what I mean by that is we only contested about half of the lower house seats in Victoria. And so as a result, the average over the state was about half what it would have been had we contested every seat. So that result of 1 to 1.2%, while far from what we hoped for and far from what I think our party is capable of achieving, is a baseline. I was very, very involved in the decision making and the push for the Libertarian Party name to be adopted after we were forced to change our name from the then Liberal Democrats after the Liberal Party passed laws forcing us to do so, which is decidedly illiberal of them. But I think it might have been the best thing that could have ever happened because we had to pick a name that much better reflected our values and who we were. But one of the reasons that I argued for the name Libertarian Party, and I still think it was the right decision for us to make, is that yes, we would be starting again no matter what name we chose, that we would be rebuilding a brand from scratch essentially, and the results reflect that a lot of people just didn't know who we were as the Libertarians. Even people who might have previously voted for and known who the Liberal Democrats were might not have known we were the same party. But the people who did vote for us and the 11,000 votes or so that I won in the Senate in Victoria were all very intentional votes. They were all people who basically went to the middle column, column P on the white tablecloth size Senate ballot, and they voted one Libertarian. That can't be put down to name confusion. It can't be put down to ballot draw. The people who voted Libertarian and the low watermark we achieved and the result we can now build on is a reflection of how many people know who we are and either agree with our ideas or are prepared to give them a go. And that's something we've never had before in our history as a party. And Australia's never had that metric before of the number of Australians. I think the best 1 to 1.2% of Australians who are understanding that libertarian ideas are the solution to the disease of collectivism.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm from South Australia. I voted for Tyler Green.
Tyler was an excellent Senate candidate.
Yes. I've spoken to him DMs a bit, and he's great guy. He knows a lot about Bitcoin.
He
And
does. He does.
yes, yes, he got me to read the Bitcoin Standard. And
Look, it's well worth a read. And
yes,
Tyler was putting just as much energy into promoting the party as I was, even before he was endorsed. So he was a great candidate, and I hope he will be a candidate again.
yes, same. So yeah, but then looking over at you guys in Victoria, it was like I don't know. I was a bit shocked at how I don't know, sorry of a performance it was, to put it, uh, bluntly. Uh, it was, I don't know, it just seemed like you guys were working so hard every day, going out there, and I don't know, I was a bit salty that day, let's just say.
Well, look, Tara, let me put it this way. I think that obviously I share those feelings, and I believe that the result we got in no way was indicative of the amount of work and effort and enthusiasm and even merit that our campaign had. But may I ask your age? How old are you?
I'm 20.
Unfortunately, in life, success doesn't always follow hard work.
Yes,
And
that is
and at age 37, as I am now, I know that the reason that I worked as hard as I did and the reason that I campaigned the way I did was so that no matter what the result was, I'd wake up on the Sunday 2 weeks ago as I did and know that I gave it everything I had. And I think that there are a lot of lessons to be learned and obviously things to improve. But I think over and above, the biggest takeaway for me was just how important the community engagement was and remains, how much awareness plays a huge part. I don't think it's true that even a large minority of Victorians knew who we were, considered our ideas, and rejected them. I think that the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of Victorians still don't know who we are. And when people do find out who we are, almost invariably, and even after the election, I've had a number of conversations like this, frustratingly, where I've sort of, because I'm still driving around in the van at the moment, and with the sign writing and stuff on it, people go, "Oh, were you running in the election?" I'm like, "Yeah, I was." And they go, "Oh, what party?" I'll say, "Oh, libertarians. We believe in small government and individual responsibility." And they go, "Oh, like common sense." And I'm like, "Yes, exactly." So I think that when I have those conversations, it's both equal parts frustrating, but also empowering and inspiring, because I know that the fight's not over. We earned every vote we got. Like, we had to fight for every single vote. We didn't get a single vote given to us by a wealthy patron, by mainstream media largesse, none of that. We are a political insurgency. We're a guerrilla movement, and like all guerrilla movements and political insurgencies, they don't win until they do. And I think that that day is inevitable in the long run. I think that we will probably outlive most of our political competitors in the minor party landscape at the moment. And I think that, I am naturally a very optimistic, enthusiastic, sort of glass half full sort of person. If I wasn't, I don't think I would have put my hand up to run the way I did. But I believe that ultimately this will represent a low water mark rather than a high tide mark. And I think that for better or worse, the next 3 years will be a period of time where a lot of people will be actually really realizing the full consequences of the political framework and the decisions they made to give that another 3 years.
Yeah, I was just, when it was happening, it's just I feel like Australians probably need to feel the pain a little bit, you
I
know.
mean, if you look at Argentina, that was true. Argentina had 30 years of, more than 30 years really, since World War II, of Peronist rule, socialism in one form or another, and it really took, hyperinflation. It took mass impoverishment, mass lack of productivity, mass shortages of power, accommodation, everything you can imagine, for people to turn to a crazy-haired, tantric sex instructor, sort of, slash crazy man like Malay. But I mean, in Australia, we, I hope, don't have to go to those depths in order to realise that a different solution is required, but we may. And I think in Victoria it will happen first. So for my part, I've been involved in politics since I was your age. That was sort of the beginning. You're ahead of where I was. I didn't really get involved in politics until I was probably a little bit older than you are now. But in that time since, I've worked with a lot of candidates, successful and unsuccessful, when I was in the Liberal Party and since. And I think that you can very often see candidates get caught up in the experience of being a candidate. And the reality is, in politics, there's no such thing as an ex-candidate. You know, there's no such thing as a position that is former lead Senate candidate for the Libertarians in Victoria. And I've put my uniform on because that's the nature of the reason I'm speaking to you. You know, is that role. And but ultimately, in between elections is when a lot of hearts and minds can be won. And in between elections is when you can have conversations with people where they don't feel like you're asking them for something. At election time, people are rightly very suspicious and cynical of politicians and political parties. But I think in between elections is a real opportunity to move the needle and to shift community sentiment. And that's true of the party, and it's true of the people who would aspire to be candidates and leaders within the party as well. And for my part, I'm going to be going back to the drawing board and continuing to pursue a lot of the issues that I advocated while I was a candidate: free speech, individual sovereignty, rehabilitation, all these kinds of things. I'm going to be redoubling my efforts at repaying my debts and kind of, strengthening my candidacy and making amends for past mistakes, and making sure that if there is a time in the future when I ever do put my hand up to run as a candidate again, that, I've done the things that I said I would do, whether elected or not. And I think that to the extent that my continuing to build my personal brand and my professional career and, continue to advocate in those spaces will ultimately benefit the cause of libertarianism by hopefully building my profile and building public awareness of our ideas through me. Those are things I can do, almost independently of the party.
So going back to something that you said, that the Libertarian Party, you said that will most likely outlive a lot of these other minor right-wing parties, and I think that has a lot of truth of it, because there's an actual ideology behind it. There's an actual proper movement behind it, unlike I don't know, Pauline Hanson's One Nation, right? When it's just Pauline Hanson. And what she believes.
Look,
Just...
Yeah, and I want to be careful not to come across as being critical, or they obviously got a far better electoral result than we did. But our party is not just about winning elections or getting candidates elected. It's about spreading awareness and understanding and acceptance of our ideas. So in a way, we have more in common with a party like the Victorian Socialists, who have a similar outlook. Like they're cheering to the rafters. They don't care that they didn't get anyone elected. They got a lot more eyeballs on their ideas. And that's what they're all about. They contest elections as a partial function of what they do to promote their ideas. And while our ideas are obviously diametrically opposed, I respect that. I disagree with their ideas and their ideology, but they are a party of principle. The wrong principles, I believe, but we can have that debate. And I did several times have the opportunity to have that debate with Jordan Vandenlam. And I've got some other plans for us to potentially continue that rivalry over the next couple of years that don't involve politics necessarily. And I know that's a bit of a cryptic thing to say, but hopefully in the coming year or so, that might become clear what I'm talking about. But I think that when you look at parties like One Nation and what remains to be seen, what will happen with a party like Rennick's People First if Gerard Rennick isn't successfully elected to the Senate, which I don't believe he will be, or Clive's Trumpeted Patriots or UAP or whatever vehicle he next has, when you have parties that are structurally brittle, that don't have really deep engagement of members, divisions and branches, Gerard Rennick's talking about building those things out. We already have them. We did the hard work in the wilderness over the last 3 years in between 2022 and this election. And in reality, we're coming into 2025 after this federal election in a far, far stronger position than we were after 2022. We were deregistered in 2022. We were never meant to become re-registered. We persisted and we're able to do that. We're still a registered party. We've engaged in constitutional reform. We've changed our name. We've got a new brand. although that has slightly different applications in New South Wales and Victoria. That's, again, a strength. That's competitive federalism. We don't have to enforce ironclad discipline. We don't have to have a leader, that people can point to and say, that's the king of libertarianism. It's not how our ideas work. And I think that creates challenges and, the reality of we can't just wake up one morning and say, well, this is our policy now. We have to have a policy that aligns with our principles. I don't think that's a weakness. I think that's a strength. But a lot of Australians want that simplicity. They want to know, who they can listen to, who is just going to be the final authority on an idea or a party. But you're right, that also limits the development and growth of some of these parties. And electoral success comes and goes. We had parties like the Australian Democrats, the Greens have gone backwards at this election, and that may be something they recover from. It may not be. I suspect that the Greens are learning the lesson of the cost of ignoring and betraying your grassroots activist base. The Greens were once an environmentalist party, believe it or not, and they've allowed themselves to become captured by this sort of woke intersectionalist self-cannibalizing agenda. And now it's a little bit harder for them to pretend that they're just a feel-good alternative to the major parties. So I think that we've already done a lot of the hard work, and we will again put in a power of work over the next couple of years. We've got the Victorian state election in November next year. We've got the New South Wales state election in March 2027 following that. And, both of those will be opportunities for us to show that the federal election was a low watermark and apply the lessons learned and continue the momentum and growth of the party and with some of the great candidates we had. For my part, I can't contest state elections in Victoria because their prohibition based on criminal record is forever. So if you've ever been convicted of an indictable offence in Victoria, you can't run for state parliament. There are parts of me that think of that as a bullet dodge or a reprieve, perhaps, but I'll still be able to support the party from behind the scenes in whatever capacity they'll have me. And certainly at the local level of my branch here in Ballarat and my area, Geelong, Ballarat and the western regions of Victoria, I'll be working hard and, perhaps not quite as front and centre, but still supporting the cause. Because at the end of the day, that's what I care about. I care about a world where hopefully me and my children and the people I care about are free to pursue their own life project without constant interference and often obstruction from every level of government. So, it's if you wanted an easy road that was a more straightforward path to political success, you probably wouldn't be, a libertarian activist. But whether I'm a masochist or just a sort of devoted zealot, we'll have to let history be the judge of that.
Yeah. So now turning to the Liberal Party and how they've reacted to this election, what are your overall thoughts of Suzanne Ley and all that stuff?
So you might have seen my last speech of the federal election campaign where I predicted that in 2028 we would miss Peter Dutton. And I think that's already being proven true. I don't like being right about these things, but if there's one thing I know, it's the Liberal Party's pathological lack of survival instincts. And basically, look, I think that while we have to wait and see what Susan Ley does, I think based on what we know about her, we can be pretty confident that the lesson the Liberals are going to learn is that they need to be more like Labor, that they need to be more Diet Coke to Labor's Coke, and that the electorate has somehow rejected a set of values and a vision that they never actually presented to them in the first place. I had a little brief spat with Peter Fitzsimmons tonight, and we said, oh, well, you guys got 0.6% of the vote and ran on a policy of nuclear energy. What does that tell you? And it's like, well, we'll never know because the Liberal Party barely mentioned nuclear energy at all. Dutton had one great response to a question about it in the second leaders debate. And I was like, where the hell has this been? And the answer is that at some point, Liberal Party experts and campaign machine men got a focus group that said women don't like nuclear energy and the coalition has a problem with women, so therefore they're just not going to talk about it. And I can guarantee you that is actually what happened. And it's to the massive detriment of not only the Liberal Party, but the country, because in effect, our political enemies can now say it was a referendum on nuclear energy, when in fact, through the Morrison government and coalition government preceding the current government, the CFMEU and the AWU were in favour of nuclear energy as a progression for skilled workforces in the coal valleys and areas like Traralgon, where they need a new workforce and they need something to replace aging coal infrastructure. So, like, this is by no means a left-right issue. This is a political, partisan, tribalist issue that, yeah, I mean, and our position isn't even that we should be building nuclear energy. It's that we should be repealing a ban. You know, like, nothing else in the world is banned just because it's too expensive. And if we're wrong, nothing happens. If we're right, we get another opportunity on the table that doesn't cost the taxpayer anything, because government certainly shouldn't be building it. So, you know, I think that looking at where the Liberal Party goes from here, I think that we will see them lurch from one disappointment to the next. I think that their members and their membership will become increasingly disillusioned. I think the fracturing of the centre-right vote, if you want to call it that, will continue and accelerate. And yeah, I can't see the necessary leadership and human resources in the Liberal Party to actually take a principled stand and to outline a real alternative vision. Because in politics, you're going to have 20% of people agree, 20% of people disagree, and 60% of people are going to say, look, I'm not really one way or the other, but this person seems like they've got the courage of their convictions and they've outlined a vision that we're prepared to try. And that's at the end of the day, if you are trying to govern by consensus, you're going to fail. If you're trying to run an opposition and gain government by consensus, you're absolutely going to fail. So that's my position on the Liberal Party. I think that, you know, I don't want to spend a huge amount of time talking about them over the next 3 years, because I want to be developing alternatives. I want to be building awareness of our party. And I think that a lot of people who are currently Liberal Party voters will be very, very interested to hear about and learn about our party. You know, I think if you look at the One Nation preference flow, we see that One Nation attracts a lot of disillusioned ALP voters who will vote One Nation as a protest vote and then vote for the Labor Party above the Liberal Party after that. So, you know, it's not true to say that One Nation is this sort of purely conservative right-wing alternative to the Liberals. In fact, they actually are really representative of the old ALP right, who the ALP has left behind. So, yeah, I think that the next couple of years will be really interesting. I think that, you know, just continuing to, I think, do what the Liberal Party hasn't done and actually provide an alternative and say, look, in this situation, we would do this instead of just saying, oh, no, we disagree with the Labor Party. Or more likely, what I think over the next 3 years, we'll say, oh, we would do what the Labor Party is doing, but better or differently or more. So, yeah, look, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, but you know, I'm never going to stop fighting for the ideas I believe in and never stop supporting the party in whatever capacity I can.
Yeah. So you said you were a former member of the Liberal Party, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what exactly made you lose hope in them?
So I can tell you the exact moment, and it was the 2014 state election in Victoria, which gave us Daniel Andrews. Daniel Andrews was the opposition leader pick for the socialist faction of the Labor left, who was not meant to win because he was the opposition leader for the second term re-election attempt of incumbent Liberal government who had just been elected 4 years ago. They were not meant to lose. They were widely expected to get a second term. And Dennis Napthine, the leader of the State Liberal Party at the time, who himself replaced Ted Value, who was also terrible, basically decided to run an election campaign on the slogan of jobs and growth. And I remember being at a Liberal Party state conference in Geelong, and basically we had Dennis Napthine come and speak to us at the conference, and you know, he was the sort of keynote speaker. And he got up and gave this big speech. In advance of him getting there, they distributed flyers that were talking about how much money the coalition had given to Avalon Airport for an upgrade of Avalon Airport, and how much money they'd given to SPC Ardmona up in Shepparton, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Coca-Cola Amatil. And they need money for a new factory. Like they are just doing it absolutely hard. They're on the bones of their ass. They can't turn a profit without Victorian taxpayer funds, despite being a wholly owned subsidiary of a massively profitable multinational company. And this was their sort of, you know, proud achievement. And I remember he got there and gave his speech, and then they said, "Oh, does anyone have any questions?" And I put my hand up straight away. And Joe McCracken, who's now an Upper House MP here in Victoria State Parliament, he was chairing the meeting, and he sort of looked at me and looked at my hand, and he went like this. He's like, "Jordan," because he knew what was coming. And I just said, "Premier, I'm just wondering where in the Liberal Party We Believe statement, where in our values it talks about corporate welfare and subsidies for massively profitable domestic and multinational corporations. Like, I don't understand where this fits into Liberal Party values." And he went a shade of purple that was like this. Like, this was how I thought he was going to have a stroke. And he basically sort of just was like apoplectic, and he's like, "Oh, I'll never apologize for fighting for jobs and growth for Victorians," or whatever. And, you know, like, at that moment, I was just like, "No, I'm out." Like, I'm like, this is cooked. I'm like, literally, what was inevitably going to happen happened. I was proven correct by the fact that they were voted out after a one-term government. And Victorians said, "You know what? If this guy's talking about jobs and growth, and that's the focus and priority, and he wants government to be providing jobs and providing investment infrastructure and all this sort of stuff, we'll just go with the Labor Party, because we know they're going to do that better. If that's what you care about, if that's what you say your issues are, and you're no different, then why wouldn't we vote for the party that's just going to be more shameless about it?" Like, at that point, I saw where the Liberal Party would go federally, where they've remained in Victoria since. And I just realised, because the other thing that happened is when the Liberals lost government in Victoria in 2014, I had a lot of mates in the Liberal Party who were staffers for MPs who had been ministers in the state government, and they'd been responsible for a portfolio area for 4 years, so transport. 2014 November, they lose the election. The week afterwards, these same people and their bosses are saying, "Oh, Labor's mess on trains, Labor's mess on infrastructure." And I'm like, sorry, I'm not going to swear. "Hey, you've been in charge of this for 4 years and didn't do anything about any of these problems you're now identifying and saying are Labor's problems." And at that moment, I realised it was just a political football, that it was blue team good, red team bad, and that it was this tribalist, you know, cheerleading exercise. And I'm like, I'm not going to waste my time and energy supporting a party that at the end of the day is all about 51% winning government, whatever it takes to do that. And they don't care. And they didn't care in 2014. And now, over 10 years on, any of the good people that did care are long gone. And you just have an increasingly, look, it's like an abusive relationship. You've got members and supporters in the Liberal Party who are just like, "Oh, well, yeah, look, they hit us sometimes, but it's only because they need to win elections, and, you know, they still really love us and care about us." It's like, no, they don't, and you're enabling them. You're enabling them by saying, like, "Oh, yeah, we like the Libertarians, but they're not a party of government." Good. You know, like, for us to be a party of government, we should be persuading a large enough number of people to agree with our ideas. Like, that's what politics is about. It's not about consulting a focus group to find out what they think. It's not about going with the lowest common denominator. It's about setting out a vision, articulating your values and what your policies are going to do for the people if implemented. And, you know, we obviously at the last election didn't do that well enough because we weren't able to get a platform and get that communicated to enough people, but we will. And when we do, whatever the results we get, whatever we're able to achieve, will be by virtue of us having convinced and persuaded people. And that has to happen outside of, you know, this platform, outside of X. That's another big lesson I learned from the election, is that, and I did both things. So I don't regret the engagement I made and will continue to make on X and other platforms. But just as important is getting out of that bubble and really getting in front of as many voters as possible.
Yeah. So it seemed like when you joined the Liberal Party, you had these I don't know, more libertarian beliefs. So when did you get introduced to libertarianism?
Well, it's actually not quite the case. When I first got involved in the Liberal Party, I probably still would have almost thought of myself, or I would now describe myself, if I was looking at how I was when I was your age and when I joined the Liberal Party, I was probably a bit of a neocon. You know, I really, this was during the Iraq War was still going on. This was around the WikiLeaks era when all of those kind of leaks and collateral murder and all that stuff was happening. And yeah, initially, I think that first year or so I was involved in the Libs, I really did think of myself as a conservative. I thought that's what I was. And then I remember learning about WikiLeaks. I remember realizing that the way the US government was responding to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and pursuing him was not the way that a country defending its interests would act, but a country that was trying to avoid embarrassment. And I sort of, it was like a real emperor has no clothes moment for me, where I realized that actually the way nation states and governments act, if they were a person, that they wouldn't be someone you really want to have much to do with. You know what I mean? That they are almost sociopathic in the way they react. And I actually have heard pretty senior arbitration lawyers. I was at an arbitration conference in WA a year or two ago before I started the campaign, and I heard this senior lawyer from Clifford Chance basically saying, the way they advise clients who are actually suing governments in investor-state arbitrations is they tell their clients not to go to any countries where these countries that they're actually in legal disputes with have any resources or assets at all, because they'll just get murdered. They literally are like, if you are suing a country in investor-state arbitration, you want to avoid anywhere they can get you, because you will just go missing. Like, and it was just fascinating. This guy's a lawyer who's not someone who's particularly political, and he was like, but just he was saying, like, the way that a nation state acts through its proxies, if it was a person, they would be a pretty nasty person to know. So the idea of the nation state as this kind of benevolent sort of warm, comforting blanket, I think that sort of fell away for me pretty early on. And so then I sort of went through a period of describing myself as probably a small L liberal or a classical liberal. And then someone, and I actually remember who it was, his name's Benjamin Marks. And I still, not Marx, M-A-R-X, M-A-R-K-S is his name. And you'd actually like Ben. He's still crazy, but I remember him telling me positions on like road funding and on all manner of things, just literally just quoting Rothbard pretty much, and just saying this is like, all the things you think government should provide as not watchman state are exceptions, and you're rationalizing exceptions, and there's no reason they have to exist. And I remember just thinking, like, I actually messaged a friend. I still have this message. I messaged a friend going, I've just met this guy and he is absolutely crazy. Like, I thought of him as like a dangerous animal. That was literally the impression I remember walking away from, going like, this guy's nuts. But then over the next couple of months, I was just like turning it around in my head, and I was like, God damn it, he's correct. I was like, yeah, I just remember. So I sort of slowly, and that was around that 2014 time, by the time I met him and spoke to him. And so, yeah, I sort of basically self-radicalized out of my own frustrations with the Liberal Party and the way that they were going. And yeah, so by 2014, 2015, I was pretty much a full-fledged libertarian. And then I had a lot of stuff in my own personal life kind of unravel fairly spectacularly on the public stage. And in my own business dealings, I really fell quite far short of my own values and the way that I was kind of advocating people should act. And that was another sort of time that really gave me cause for reflection. And that was another period of political growth and me thinking about, how could I navigate repairing. Sorry, is that on your end?
Yeah, sorry, it's my bell clock.
That's right. No, that's okay. So, I had to navigate working through how to basically how to navigate working out what was the libertarian response to my mistakes. Like, in a world where people fall short of their values, harm others, like when the harm principle is breached, how do you actually reconcile that as a libertarian if you have harmed others or you have aggressed against them? What is the libertarian worldview on punishment, on law and order, on crime, all that sort of thing? So I was reflecting and thinking on those things while I was going through those experiences. And I read Rothbard for a New Liberty during that time. So I read Rothbard in prison. So that was probably further radicalization, I think it would be fair to say. But yeah, it wasn't kind of abstract. It was very personal. I had to really sit and think and square the circle and go, like, if I'm going to rebuild a life of integrity, and if I'm going to be a person who's reliable and trustworthy and honest, and, if I'm going to hold these views and advocate for them, how am I going to respond to my own shortcomings, and how am I going to deal with them in a in a way that's consistent with my values. And so for me, a big part of that was making amends, of starting to make repayments and not just treating my prison sentence like that was, done and dusted, and the situation was done. So, I've repaid around 15 to 16%, I think now, of money's owed to people who were harmed by my actions then. And that's something I'm really keen to, I think, turn to and intensify over the next couple of years. I really want to make big inroads, if not repay those in full.
For the people who are uninformed at home, what was the exact crime you did?
So basically, I had a travel agency business that I bought when I was pretty much not much older than you. And if you can imagine how bad an idea that might be, you would probably be correct in the sense that I borrowed money to do that. I really thought that I didn't need to listen or learn from anyone. I was very convinced that I, could run before I could walk, and that I was going to be this next kind of would-be Lord of the Universe. And it was basically just a big combination of complete lack of business experience, complete lack of self-reflection and willingness to learn and be mentored by others. So a lot of ego, a lot of arrogance. And on top of that, also a big struggle with drug and alcohol addiction, which I'd sort of had since I was 15. And so those things all sort of came together, and, I made a lot of mistakes. The business spent more money than it earned over a period of about 3 years, and then it never really recovered from that. I traded insolvent for a couple of years trying to trade through those losses. But at the end of the day, everything unraveled, and then the business failed with clients of that business owed money at the time the business closed. And then on top of that, I also had drug-related offences that I was charged for while I was on bail for the travel agency offences. So, when I describe that period of time as my life unravelling or disintegrating on the public stage, that's no exaggeration. I really had to sort of reconstitute myself from almost nothing and sort of start again from rock bottom. So, it's not an experience I would recommend, but I feel like I was able to use that experience to both help myself and my life today, and also, I hope, over the last 10 years, I've been able to help other people struggling with the same challenges. And that's another thing that I think I'd really like to return to in this next sort of chapter of my life. I'd love to be working in space that involves criminal justice reform and rehabilitation, helping people find employment and education after prison. Like, basically, because if you take the people who are the most draining, the most harmful to society, and you are able to actually change their trajectory and make them contributing, positive, law-abiding members of society, that's an outsized benefit. It's incredible. Like the cost that someone over the lifetime of offending and that cycle of recidivism would have on taxpayer resources, on the state, on society in terms of actual harm, financial harm. If you can actually make a difference and change them to another path, like what I have been able to change myself to, that's an immense saving in terms of human and economic potential. So I think that, especially looking at young offenders, looking at people who are first-time offenders who are trying to make it stay the first time, like I was able to in the end. So something like that is something I'm really looking forward to, hopefully being able to find a way to express over the next couple of years. I'm also hoping to write a book about my experiences, both in prison and in the time since, and finishing my law degree and all that sort of thing, and also in politics. So, the question will be where that time comes from, I suspect.
Mm. And you just said that you got your law degree since you got out of prison. So what exactly was that process like?
Very challenging. So in prison, I started and did half of an undergraduate business degree. So, and that in itself was incredibly challenging because I had to basically jump through a number of hurdles to get access to a distance education program while I was in prison. While I was in prison for that first 18 months of my degree, I had 1 hour of internet access a week, which was supervised. I wasn't able to touch a keyboard or a mouse. I was able to look at a duplicate monitor and direct or request a prison officer, senior education officer at prison, to actually click on and type what I asked him to do. So it was literally like remote control, fly-by-wire degree. I had 1 hour a week of internet access that I could use to download materials and to access my course and units and things like that. And I actually graduated that degree in the end with a high distinction average. I finished that degree on parole, so when I was released. So I did the first half in prison and the second half on parole. And then not long into COVID, a couple of months into COVID, I made the decision to go back to uni and do a postgraduate Juris Doctor, so my postgraduate law degree. And when I started that, I really had no idea that I might be working in law or practicing law or anything like that. I didn't think that would be possible with my past. But as I went through the degree and as I met mentors and people who were encouraging me, I realized that actually there was that possibility. And ultimately, I graduated that law degree with the top academic mark for the 2023 academic year. And in December of last year, I obtained a compliance certificate, which will allow me, should that be the decision I make, to be admitted to legal practice. So I'm at the threshold of that now. I'm not sure whether that is the pathway that I'll take. I'm looking at different options, some of which are fairly advanced and that I'll be hopefully able to talk about in the next couple of weeks. Because the campaign also reminded me that, a traditional sort of 9 to 5 working in a law firm as a junior solicitor isn't necessarily what I want to be. It's not necessarily the most fulfilling or rewarding thing for me. There's a lot of things I'm passionate about that I hope I can pursue through the work opportunities I'm able to find in the next couple of years. And I suspect that will probably look like a bit of a Rubik's Cube of different things, like that's kind of how I've always been. And that was one of the things I enjoyed about the campaign, was that ability to pursue the things I was passionate about, to be the master of my own fate a little bit. And I'm hopefully going to find a nice balance between, gainful employment and things that I'm passionate about. That's a takeaway from the last 13 months for me.
Yeah. Well, I had a Stefan Kinsella on the last episode. I assume you know who that is?
I beg your pardon?
Stefan Kinsella?
I've not met Stefan, no.
Okay. Well, he's a libertarian theorist. He's a protege of Hopper, and he's a lawyer, and he's big things about like intellectual property and all of that stuff.
Okay.
And
fascinating.
right, and and then his kind of training and all of that, being a lawyer and going to law school, kind of gave him like a deeper understanding of how law and how rights and all that work. And he came up with something called the estoppel principle, which pretty much says that you can't advocate for your own rights if you, I don't know, violate someone else's rights. And so did your experience in law school and that give you a kind of deeper insight into how libertarian theory works and all that stuff?
Yeah, look, I think that as a libertarian studying law, I think that it really reaffirmed for me a lot of what I already suspected, which was that government is uniquely bad at writing legislation, and the tools they use, the only tools they have, that is legislation, regulation, rulemaking, often has unintended consequences even in the drafting and statutory interpretation. Parliament will not infrequently attempt to do things and fail when it comes to actually drafting legislation, not in terms of getting legislation passed, but in terms of actually achieving the object of legislation. Learning about law, which is the branch of law that's executive and their powers, and
Oh, you're cutting out for a second. Can you just repeat the last 10 seconds?
Yeah, of course. So the administrative law, which is the branch of law that deals with limits on what executive government can do, that's a very, very interesting area of law as well that talks about, it basically demarks the limit between government action and government authority and power, and there's often a big gap between them. Often the government will either knowingly or unknowingly push its powers beyond what it actually is able to do, and the only test of that is when affected parties or aggrieved parties seek to confirm in the court what the government's power and remit actually is. And it's amazing how often government basically tries to push the envelope and finds itself outside the boundaries of its power. Yeah, certainly found legal study as a libertarian very intellectually interesting. And I've actually kind of found my focus or specialty of law in arbitration, international commercial arbitration, which is fundamentally private justice, where it's essentially commercial justice by contract, which is a fascinating area of law and incredibly libertarian. Nobody in the arbitration space realizes how incredibly revolutionary and libertarian it is, and I'm quite happy to keep it that way for now. I might write a book on it one day. But if you look at the roadmap for what could replace the nation state, international commercial arbitration is a massive component of that. Because functionally, if you ever wonder why you don't hear about disputes between Google and Apple and Samsung and all these companies in court, it's because they all deal with it basically in-house by way of arbitration agreements. If they have a dispute, they pick the judges, they pick the law that applies, they pick where they're going to hear it, they pay for the court, the arbitrators, the clerks, everything, and it all gets dealt with in-house and confidentially. So there is a very large part of international commercial disputes that never sees the inside of a courtroom, and that the state's only involvement in is basically enforcement of an award. And even then, that is a sort of a nicety or a formality alone, because if a state didn't enforce an international award that these companies have agreed on in their dispute, then essentially they would just take it somewhere else to enforce it, and then the government would lose out on this massive source of revenue that international commercial arbitration represents. So they're almost forced to actually abide by the decisions made by these private arbitrators and private panels and tribunals. So it's a fascinating area, and that transnational law space. And I think Bitcoin and AI will play a massive part in that as well. Those are areas that I'm fascinated to learn more about the legal framework and regulatory framework of. And I think that, sort of arbitration, AI, crypto, and Bitcoin in the legal space has the potential to really revolutionize how we think about the law.
Yeah, and then as well, we've talked to Stefan Kinsella last week. He says how like international law kind of relies itself on to natural law, and it's rather than this positivist view that we have.
Yeah, so there's two types of international law. There's public international law, which I think is what he's talking about, and that's very true. They do rely a lot on natural justice, and they do have those different sources. And then there's private international law, which is older again and really draws on the lex mercantis, the idea that, if you look up, and it's fascinating because you can do this, there were arbitration disputes as long ago as ancient Greece, where merchants who had a dispute about a contract of goods or cargo or whatever would go to the nearest port and have their dispute heard by a merchant of good reputation that they trusted. And he would make a ruling, and that would be the way the dispute was resolved. And if either party didn't play their part in that dispute being enforced and the agreed price being paid or compensation being made or whatever, they would just be frozen out of markets. And so the merchant law really is this kind of fusion of civil code jurisdictions in Europe and common law jurisdictions in the UK and our jurisdictions. And it's actually this kind of really old, deep law that is very much bound up with the market and with trade and the needs and realities of merchants, rather than the sort of formalities of a courtroom. So international private law is almost older again, and it's essentially a necessity that has arisen from the realities of international trade for as long as that's existed. And I just think it's fascinating, and it's a real, it's a tradition that you can really trace back to before the Treaty of Westphalia, which is where the modern nation state arose. And people don't realize how recent our concept of a nation state is. Like, they don't realize that for the vast majority of human history, our modern conception of the nation state was not a thing that existed. So, I think that looking at instances of customary law, natural law, transnational law, things that almost arise and exist independently of jurisdiction, state-sponsored sources of law, I think that's a really interesting area.
Yeah, and then as well, reading a lot of Stefan Kinsella's work, it just shows that I guess the legislative law is quite a a new invention, right? Like this stuff didn't exist like 100 years ago, even, or gone past that.
Well, what you'll also find is that there are very large areas of human society and interaction where legal recourse is not how problems get solved. And often you will see, I mean, black markets are a great example, right? Where I've operated in contraband black markets in the past when I was involved in drugs and things like that. Now with the illegal black market tobacco that you see, like those worlds governed by principles that are broadly agreed, still governed by norms and values. They're not the values that the rest of society or all of society might, but they are a subculture, they are a subset of rules that are just as real and that are applied just as regularly and consistently. And there are areas of life where if people just don't agree that something is illegal to be illegal, then it functionally isn't. Right.
Mm.
You go down the street today, if you walk out your door and go down the street and walk long enough, and just guarantee you'll see illegal black cigarette advertised. The police won't be doing anything about it because it's not in their interest for the.
All right, you're cutting out again.
Like,
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Look, I can't see any reason why that should be on my side. But
okay.
I am getting to the point. That's all right. I am probably getting to a point where I might need to consider hitting the hay not too far away from now. But I will actually look up and I'll watch that episode with Stefan, and I'll turn my mind to reading some of the works now. I've got a bit more time to do that.
All right, cool. All right. Well, I think that's probably a good place to call it then. Almost an hour. So yes, thank you, Jordan, for coming on. Let the people know where to find you.
Yeah, so look, I'm for now on X, still at Dittloff for Senate. So Dittloff, DITTLOFF, the number 4, and then Senate. I'm not sure if I will change that. I don't know. It's sort of convenient, and people seem to know the handle so far. But I've also got a website if people want to know more about my past or want to see any of the articles or things I've done. I'll be updating that to include some of the things that I did in podcasts I participated in through the campaign. So that's www.jordandittloff.com.au. And yeah, hopefully this will not be the last that I'm heard of.
Yes, hopefully. Well, I'll have that all in the description below. And yeah, thanks for watching.
No worries. Thanks for having me.